Welcome to the Real News Network and Women's Take. Today I'm joined by Sunila Abeysekera. She is a renowned human rights activist from Sri Lanka. She is well respected from both sides, the Tamils and the Sinhalese. She has been awarded some of the highest honors at the United Nations and Human Rights Watch for her human rights work. And today she joins us in our Toronto studio. Thank you for joining us, Sunila.
Happy to be here.
Sunila, there are 300,000 displaced people in more or less what many are calling internment camps. What are you hearing? What are the conditions there?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is that there's not enough attention to the fact that these people have come to these camps after months of deprivation. So they are malnourished, they're anemic, they're dehydrated. Many of them have infected wounds that have been really going bad for months. And that's why immediate attention is absolutely essential. And at the moment what we're hearing is that since most humanitarian agencies do not have unrestricted access, that a lot of the people are not getting the care that they needed. On April 27th, the High Court judge from Vavonia recorded 14 deaths of elderly people of what he said was starvation in one day, and directed the government to pay particular attention to elderly people, and that's just one example.
What is preventing the government from allowing the international agencies to go in there now to help?
Well, the government's logic is that the LTT may have infiltrated into this 300,000, and well, we accept that that's probably a reality, but what we're resisting is this idea that the government is putting forward that they will screen the people and then give access. We're saying you need to give access while you're in the process of screening, and that process of screening needs to be accompanied by independent observers. What we're hearing now also is that the camps are actually internment camps because they are guarded by the military and people's mobility is very restricted. You cannot leave the camps unless you jump through many, many hoops, and people cannot visit you in the camps, right? What's happening is that paramilitary groups that used to be a part of the LTT and have split away, are going into the camps with hooded informers and identifying certain people and then taking them out of the camps. And about last week we heard that at least 200 boys between the ages of 11 and 17 were taken out of the Manik Farm camp and taken to the Nilunkulam Technical College camp. But there's no list, and parents are desperate. And all we're really asking for is a list. Make a list of these 300,000 people so that if one of them is moved from one camp to another, someone will be responsible. At the moment, there is no record, and therefore people, the tendency for people to disappear is really large, and we're extremely worried about that.
Are there international agencies waiting on the sidelines to go in and help?
Well, the UNHCR and the ICRC are both the agencies that have a long expertise in doing this kind of accompaniment and registration and stuff like that. But at the moment, they don't have access.
What about the disappearances? What are some of the concrete stories you're hearing?
Well, I mean, these we're counting as disappearances, right? The people who are being taken out of the camps, because we don't have the possibility to track them. The government admits that it has almost 10,000 so-called LTTE surrendees and captives in detention. We don't know where they are. We don't have a list of who they are. And, many people who were arrested and detained in the last days are also wives and family members of senior LTT cadre, right? For example, Susei's wife and children who were arrested by the Sri Lanka Navy at sea, and we don't know where they are. So at least in particular cases, we're trying to find out where are these people being detained, and that's impossible.
And there are also some messages getting out about the torture that's taking place in some of these detention centers, not unlike Abu Ghraib. What are you hearing?
Well, the Sri Lankan intelligence has always been extremely good at torture. And I think when Manfred Novak, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, visited, I think in 2007, his report is extremely damning of the conditions that he found, not only in the places of detention under PTA or the emergency regulations, but in places just in ordinary prisons, right? Overcrowding, for example, basic things, forget the torture, just overcrowding, lack of access to medical attention, and then including on top of that the beatings, the waterboarding, you name it, and we hear stories about it, and there are many torture victims who have come forward and with their testimonies as a part of their asylum claims in Canada, in the UK, in the US. I think there's enough evidence of torture in Sri Lanka in these kinds of detention centers.
What kind of pressure can be brought about on the Sri Lankan government at this moment, and by whom?
Well, at this moment, I think the only thing that the international community can do with the Sri Lankan government is continue to appeal for access, unrestricted access to the camps, and the public, the preparation of a centralized database of detainees and of the internally displaced persons in the camps. Those are really basic asks. These are not, we're not saying the LTT never did anything that was terrorist. We're not saying let them all go. We're just saying make a list and make that list public. For every one of those people who died, and we don't know how many have died in the military operation in the last days. I mean, there's a number of 20,000 that is being now proposed by people who have information, and of course the government denies that number. For every one of those people, I mean, in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, in France, there are people who had, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters who have disappeared and who have died, I mean, at least on behalf of those members of the Tamil diaspora who are living in these countries, there should be some attempt made to impress upon the government of Sri Lanka the inhumanity of denying the fact that these people are either in the camps, are in hospitals, or in detention. And if they're not in any one of these three places, they're dead, but we need to know. People need to know, and that, I think, is like the biggest ask that the international community can do on behalf of Tamil civilians in Sri Lanka today.
Right. And who is that international community? Who is the organization or the country that can bring about a difference and where they'll be heard by the Sri Lankan government?
The Chinese, the Japanese, the South Africans, and the Brazilians. If those four countries would really make a voice on behalf of just very basic humanitarian principles, access to the camps and a centralized list of people who are in the camps.
Why these countries?
Well, because of their economic and political interactions with the Sri Lankan government. The Sri Lankan government has been very resistant to any pressure that comes from the US or from Canada or from Europe, on the basis that this is all part of an an imperialist and neo-colonial plot. But these are our southern, fellow travelers. China has invested hugely in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government has got many loans and promises of grants, huge grants of money from the Chinese. The Brazilians are very influential within the southern, within the non-aligned movement and things like that. The South Africans have always been looked to by the Sri Lankan government as being representative of, southern democracy. So, these countries have the capacity to influence, and it's very sad that they don't see that it doesn't cost anything, actually.